Thank you. Thank you very much. And I feel very privileged and welcome to every single person who's online now. We don't have a great time, and I thank you for that introduction, Torsten. I think we need to get after the topic really, really quickly. I'm part of a movement called The World Needs a Father. It's over 100 countries are involved, and over 20 languages are involved in The World Needs a Father. Now, The World Needs a Father is in my line of work, one more thing that we really do need to make a contribution towards. I myself don't think I've had very good coaching in fatherhood, not because my dad didn't want to coach me properly, but I was raised at a time when was quite a lot of ignorance among men about what children needed. There's ignorance. Sometimes men had a very harmful way in which they engage with their families and their children. Sometimes men are available in the household, but they're quite disengaged emotionally with their children. And sometimes, of course, men are not present at all. And at the moment, over 62% of South African households do not have the biological father. Doesn't mean that there aren't other male figures in the household. It means that the biological father isn't available. And we can have lengthy conversation about the significance or insignificance of that. But within research, we know that when you're working with children, for instance, mother is the best care provider. Biological mom is the best care provider. Even when a woman has adopted a child and assumes the role of the biological mom, she is the best possible caregiver, because she brings not only a roof over the child's head or clothes on the child's back, she brings affection, she brings eye contact, she brings a touch, she brings all of these kinds of things that all conspire to give the child either a positive or a negative experience. So in fatherhood, you have the same thing. What the child really needs from very little is it needs eye contact and it needs touch. It really does fundamentally need that. From the time the child is a baby, some of its crying has to do with the child needing eye contact and needing touch. And so the minute you pick the child up, you're soothing it. It stops crying. The minute the child sees you, it kicks its legs and it waves its arms and it gets excited at seeing you, because eye contact and touch is what's needed. Right across the human experience, that whole spectrum, the human beings turn up with the same needs. Even when I'm an old man, which in part I am, an old man with grandchildren, great-grandchildren, I see that in other old men. I have no reason to suspect I'll be any different. But if I see my children after a long time of absence, and I have eye contact with them, and I hold them, and I have touch towards them, I think that's going to be amazingly therapeutic for me. Because human beings turn up needing those things. They need eye contact, they need touch, they need stimulation from the youngest time. And so when a man is completely absent out of the life of the child, he makes it very difficult for whoever is left to provide the emotional contact that the child and his life partner needs. It just plunges them into neuro-emotional crisis, as it were. And so we're going to talk about the fact that these are the things we need, and the way that we turn up with each other in eye contact and touch and in stimulation. These things establish four very important foundational principles. The first one is secure attachment. I understand as a child that I'm securely attached to my mom or my dad or my brother, to the extent that I have eye contact from them, that I have touch from them, that their voice is gentle towards me, I begin neurologically, the brain begins to make sense that not only am I safe, but I'm also securely attached. I am accepted where I understand myself to belong. So that's one of the very first things that we want to establish. We want to establish secure attachments, because there are 4 ways people can attach. The others are quite unhelpful ways. And if you want to get more information on that, go into attachment theory. But the attachment that we really want is secure attachment. I know that I'm accepted where I understand myself to belong. And that sends neurological messages to me that I am safe as a consequence of that attachment. And how do I know I'm securely attached? Well, that comes in the shape of eye contact, touch, and stimulation. That's the language through which we communicate to each other. The second thing that we want to establish with eye contact, touch, and so on is that I am loved. Not only am I accepted, but I'm also loved. And how do I know I'm loved? Well, the way that when you turn up and you communicate to me in my love language, it triggers hormones that releases dopamine, endorphins, oxytocin. These kinds of hormones are neurotransmitters. They're also what we call happy hormones. I feel happy. You're triggering my parasympathetic nervous system, the part of my nervous system that has to do with rest, with shalom, with peace, with pleasure. That's what you're doing when you're loving me. That's what you're doing when you're turning up in my love language. Now, to get more information on that, you can go into the love languages, the 5 love languages, and go and get a deeper idea of what is the language in which through which people understand that they are loved. In my family, for instance, my wife and my son, they need quality time. If I can clear my schedule, so these days I'm really very good at it. On a Saturday morning, usually 6 o'clock, I bring my wife a cup of tea, get out of bed, maybe 5:45, get out of bed, off we go to the beach, which is just 10 minutes away from us by car. And we sit on the beach, and you've got this amazing sunrise, and you've got this beautiful, crisp, can't even describe it. But it's she and I, and we walk, and we talk about domestic things, and we talk about all kinds of different things. And for her and for me, it is not only therapeutic, it is so validating. Yeah, you're communicating for this person through their love language that they are loved. One of my children needs touch. That's the youngest one. She's the kind of child that will sit on your lap, stand behind you, and hold you from behind and grab your arm when you're walking in public. Touch is the language through which she communicates her affection. And I turn up in that language for her. But if you're ignorant, or if you're absent, and if you disengage, of course, you can say something like, "Stop touching me! Stop being so irritating." But the person is really only trying to communicate affection towards you. And they receive the message that they are loved through the way that you and I touch her. Now, the third thing that's very necessary is that we have to learn that we are enough. Affirmation. So not only do I want to communicate that you belong, that you're securely attached, I also want to communicate that you're loved. And not only do I want to communicate those two, I also want to communicate that you matter, you're valuable, you are enough, and this version of you is acceptable to me. That I'm not comparing your worth against the value of others, and I'm not I'm not going to love you dependent on the kind of hoops I need you to jump through. This version of you is acceptable to me, and I can receive you and love you as you are. You are enough. And of course, we understand that when people get that wrong, when they only conditionally accept others, or their children particularly, then their children, even when they're long gone and have passed away, they continue to have a crisis of accepting that they are enough. They keep trying to get validation from others. They keep trying to get feedback from other people that they are sufficient, they are good enough, they are acceptable as they are. And that is a never-ending quest, because I've not received that fundamental input. You are enough. You are loved. I will never abandon you. You will never be made into an orphan. You will always belong. As you are acceptable to me. How God made you is acceptable to me. What you're choosing is acceptable to me. You are more than the things you do, and you are received well by me. The fourth thing, of course, is pleasure. Now, pleasure, it's just absolutely wonderful that someone can, by engaging your dad, your mom, your brother or sister, can have laughter, can have joy. I remember being so envious of a friend of mine years ago, and I never knew him when he was a child. I knew him as an adult. And I attended his dad's memorial service. And he was talking about his dad and said, you know, the third reason, the first one is secure attachment. The second one is affection. The third one is affirmation. You are enough. Pleasure, laughter, fun is the fourth one. And so this fourth one, he's talking about his dad. He says every Friday night was a games evening for them. And so the kids from school and the kids in the neighborhood got to hear over time how much fun it was at Gary's house. And so on a Friday evening, they'll take out the games, they will make pizzas, they will have some 80s music in the background, and they would play games. And there would be laughter, there'd be fun. These are completely inexpensive things. It is just that you have ring-fenced a time where we have a lot of eye contact, we have a lot of touch, we have a lot of laughter, there's fun. That you can watch, you can just list for yourself a list of inexpensive things you can do: making popcorn, watching a movie, playing card games, wrestling, playing. My son and I, we do boxing. Oh, this guy's, I'm terrified of him. He's quick, he's skilled, he's strong, he's none of the things I am, but it's his love language that I should spend time with him. And so he derives a lot of pleasure from doing something physical with me. Okay, so for him, that just really raises his level of joy and pleasure. I need something else after that, because it just drains me of pleasure, getting knocked about in a ring. But laughter, joy, fun, pleasure, that's the fourth component. So these four things are what we need. And how do we know we're receiving them? By the quality of the human connection we have, the eye contact, the touch. So when we're talking about fatherhood and fathers, it is the quality of presence we're wanting to stimulate in men. Now, there are a few barriers, reasons why men actually don't turn up in that way. And the first one is, of course, they haven't had role models, or they weren't raised in an environment where these four things are intentionally being created for their children. They weren't socialized to make a child feel securely attached or loved, or that I'm enough, and they're not giving sufficient, they did not receive sufficient feedback that they were enough. People weren't holding them and so on. I remember when I went to Bible school in the 80s, late 80s, I walked straight into a completely different culture. And this was on the Cape Flats. And the Cape Flats colored community, very affectionate people, very bold and large in the way they turn up with their emotion. And so in that program, I received hugs and all. Oh, it was just delicious. Anyway, I get home and I walk through the door, hitchhike, my backpack is on me. I walk through the door, my dad comes towards me, visibly happy to see me. And I lean in to hug him, and he's as stiff as a plank, holding out his hand. And so, of course, he didn't know this way of human connection, this touch. Handshaking is about as much as you could expect from him, not because he's a bad person, but because he was socialized that way. He had no role model who expressed affection for him in a way that I was doing at that time. It didn't take him long, and he was dealing out hugs all around the house after a while, because human beings also have neuroplasticity, and that is the idea that our brains are incredibly moldable. If you suddenly need to do DIY and you're needing to learn new skills in your household, your brain literally reshapes to accommodate this new thing that you're wanting to do. So this utter trash that you can't teach an old dog new tricks, it's complete nonsense. You can continually learn. We learn until the day we die. Our brains are malleable, very adaptable. It accommodates new things that we're trying to do. And so I now understand it was really easy and quick for my dad to adapt, to learn to receive hugs and to hand out hugs and to love in that language. Didn't take him long. Okay. So sometimes men are this way because they just simply were not socialized to be affectionate and so on. Another reason it causes men to not turn up understanding these four things and turning up, sharing with the people they love in this manner, is because they've had no formal learning. So I can unlearn this aloofness by being even in a classroom. I can be taught what are the things that children really do require. I can take that in, my brain can adapt, and I can turn up practicing these new skills. So there is a place for formal learning. And so sometimes men have not been socialized, neither have they been formally trained on what are needed, what can you do, and what permissions you can give yourself. And so that's the second thing that's also necessary. Not only is the children who have been socialized to be affectionate, oh my goodness, they just turn up that way in life. And if in addition to that, they have had a formal framework for how they think about what's needed, what my role is, how do I turn up, what should I do, when that enhances the socialization. It gives me insight on why. It gives me that big, why are you doing what you're doing? And so having a why is also really fundamentally important. And not only a why, but what is it I must do and how do I do it? And so we can create a framework. And so the World Needs a Father has a really very good framework for how you understand what is the neurology that people need. How do I reshape myself to be able to provide those, and how do I turn up in my own life with those skills? And I think the third reason why men often are not present is because they carry a lot of woundedness of their own. So let's imagine for a minute, I needed secure attachment, I needed affection, I needed affirmation, and I needed pleasure and fun and laughter. And imagine for a moment I didn't get it. And imagine as a very young child, I cried and cried and cried, looking for eye contact, looking for touch. And instead I get a smack. I am tired of your naughtiness. Okay? So what I'm needing is eye contact and touch, and what I get instead is a smack. My brain begins to develop around the idea that these people are not reliable. I shouldn't expect that they can provide what I emotionally need. The child begins to create that picture for themselves. And as human beings, we will keep reshaping ourselves in the hope that the new version that we've created will become acceptable to the people who are my people. I try and remake myself, and that gets rejected. I'm looking for touch. Someone has gone and told my mom, your child is naughty, you're spoiling it, it's always in your hands, when will you ever get things done? Let the child cry. It will realize that you're not coming and you're not going to spoil it, and it will just fall asleep and you'll be okay. What utter garbage. And it's the kind of garbage that we perpetuate over the generations. The child is asking for eye contact and touch. And since I know it's looking for touch, as I pick it up, it's soothed by the ideology that you should leave the child and it should learn, teach it, not to rely on you emotionally. Let it lie there in that cot until it falls asleep by itself. What kind of a message is that? Okay. So sometimes we develop woundedness from a very young age. We begin to worry about whether we are enough. We worry about whether we are loved. We wonder if we are safe. We come towards our household and we get panic attacks. We worry about, am I in trouble? Have I done something wrong? Will dad be angry today? Will mom be cross with me? Okay, so these are the opposite of what I need. And so in that process of trying to rework myself so that I can receive acceptance, so that I can receive hugs, so that I can receive affection, that creates a woundedness. And that woundedness, according to Dr. Gabor Mate, is the very reason why substance abuse becomes the way that people become to self-soothe. People self-soothe through substance abuse and other kinds of addictions because they are in flight mode. They are trying to get away from this painful thing, and they're placing themselves in another state so that they can either chemically induce joy or happiness or pleasure because it's not available for them in the life that they're living. And so they create this other life where they're hiding and where they're deriving pleasure and where they're escaping from their reality because their reality is painful. And so sometimes men are unavailable because of their woundedness. And everything related to connecting with human beings is unreliable and painful. And I learned that as a child. When I wanted to eye contact and when I wanted to touch, and it was completely unavailable. I got smacks instead. I got shouted at. I got told, oh, I've got butterfingers and you're stupid and you will never amount to anything. Why are you so worthless? It was a mistake to have you. That's what I received. And so everywhere feels emotionally unsafe for me. And I create for myself another reality into which I can escape, where I can chemically induce pleasure and derive some kind of a pleasure. So these are the three main reasons we find it that men battle with being present. It's because they have no role modeling. It's because they're not part of a formal, transformative learning process. And of course, they carry a lot of woundedness. If I must bring a fourth one in, and I think it's important, is they're not relationally connected to people who are actively mitigating their experience. Okay, so I remember when I was in Bible school first in Benoni, and it was in a white community, and as a dark-skinned colored men in the 80s, it was an enormous learning curve for me, because I was plunged into being the assistant youth pastor at a church in Benoni. And that meant I had to enter into these young people's lives, visit them at home and so on. And it was astounding what I experienced in these households, and how many households were nurturing and loving and accommodating to their own children. And I myself had never experienced that. It wasn't part of my socialization. It wasn't part of my formal training. But I remember experiencing that and thinking to myself, I like that. I want that for myself. I want that for myself. I see something, I want it for myself. And so in wanting it for myself, I am reverse engineering what I'm seeing, because the brain is making sense and I'm giving myself permission to have that in my life. And I'm looking for enough information so that I can reverse engineer for myself the idea of accommodating a space for my children one day that is pleasant, that is nurturing, that is encouraging. So just having relationships with people who are expressing fatherhood in a way that I admire, and the exposure to that gives me the desire to want that for myself and my children. And the brain's enormous capacity, this amazing thing that God gave us as a gift, it begins to make sense of where I am and where I want to be. And it begins to reverse engineer getting there. So if I would have to say that just being relationally with men who are on a journey to become men who are present in the lives of their families is already very educational for other men. Okay? I remember going into the World Needs a Father for the first time. My wife sent me there. Now, as Torsten said, we created this organization. Its focus was initially on HIV and so on. And as you go along, the Spirit tells you, look at this, look at that. You were also made for this. I brought you into this timeline for that. Remember, you're not of this world, although you're in this world. You're in this world, but you're not of this world. I've placed you in this world, in this timeline. You are problem solving. You are useful in this timeline. I've placed you here through your parents so that you can be here. And so this journey of fatherhood, she says to me, because she's the executive director of the organization, you know what, we may actually need to do this fatherhood via our organization. Would you and Ben attend the workshop and see whether there's something we can get involved in? I wonder if she was sneakier than that, or whether that was really just the innocent request. And so I turned up in this workshop and I was just completely floored with all of this amazing information and insight. And I remember maybe the second or third day of this workshop saying to myself, I want to be an amazing dad. I want to give my children a gift. And the gift I want to give them is that they don't have to go into their past to fix things. They only have to walk straight into the future that God intends for them. If there's a gift I'm going to give my children, it is so that they don't have balls and chains tied to their ankles, stuff they have to fix from their past in order to begin to walk into their future. The gift I want to give them is that they can just walk into their future. That there's no woundedness, ignorance, or that they haven't had a role model. Well, I started late. I had regrets. I wish I had known that information before I even had children, but I didn't. I already had a son. My son had already had unpleasant and unnecessary unpleasant experiences at my hand because of my ignorance. But I had spent time to try and mitigate the harm I had done. People, as I said, because of neuroplasticity, they reshape very quickly and very easily. Okay. So I think when we do workshops, let me tell you a couple of stories. The one story that was absolutely amazing for me is we worked down the south of KwaZulu-Natal. And of course, as you know, KwaZulu-Natal is full of Zulus. It's a kingdom of the Zulus. And they are a phenomenal group of ethnic group of people, large-hearted, very affectionate, very emotional, and live out who they are boldly in front of you. And so down the south coast in Port Shepstone and the regions around Port Shepstone, we started a workshop and journeyed with some men. And of course, these kinds of things were for many Zulu men. What are you talking about? If you don't bliksem the child, how will he learn? And so one of the guys in the group needed his son to be at home when he gets from work. And he shambok this child when he doesn't find him at home. Go and find him wherever he is and shamboks him to get home. So he is attending this workshop and his brain is totally having seizures and glitches. To cut a long story short, the outcome is I organize a second workshop. He attends again. And we're introducing ourselves to the new men. And he says, you know, I attended this workshop once before. And when I silently went home and said to myself, okay, let me try these things that this man is talking about. And so I took the shambok and I gave it to my brother. I don't want it in the house anymore. Gave it to my brother. When I got home and my son wasn't there, I didn't fight with him. I didn't look for him. I did nothing. When he came, I went, I talked to him. I put my arm around his shoulder. I said to him, my boy, I worry about the family when there's no one here. I worry about the safety of the younger children. I rely on you. You are my wingman. If you're not here, I feel as though I'm letting the family down. And so he's having this dialogue and conversation. He says the most amazing thing that happened is his son followed him like a shadow into the kitchen, around the house, sitting next to him in the lounge. And when he comes home, his son is there. And he was so confused because he had achieved something with his son that a shambok could not achieve. Because a shambok will never achieve the connectedness that the children need from us. He'll never achieve that. It is really very important that you and I understand eye contact, touch, stimulation is the language we speak. And what we're wanting to communicate to the people we love, to our children, is that they are loved, that we see them, we hear them, they belong, they are securely attached, that they are enough, that we accept this version of who they are, how they were made. We recognize they're not people that will stand on the platform and lead a crowd, that they are a behind-the-scenes, quiet, reflective person with a soft voice. They're not broken. It's how God made them. They are more of an introvert, quiet, reflective person. We recognize that our children may be creative. They're not sporty. And they don't disqualify as our children because they're not sporty. They are completely acceptable to us because they are creative. They create music, they create art, they create beauty, and they're not broken. It's how they're made, and they are enough. And that we're creating and seeking opportunity for pleasure, for laughter, for connection. And out of that place, people do incredibly well. You just have to look at the Jewish nation. Now look at look at how the Jewish nation socialized their children. And let's just look at Shabbat on a Friday. There's a meal we have together. We're going to play. It is a time for connection and a time for relaxation. It's a time for the father to cup his hands around his daughter's face, to kiss her and to say, you are beautiful. Your face is beautiful and your voice is sweet. You are made in the image of God. I am for you, not against you. You are loved. You will go far. And to do that for his son, and to do that for his next daughter, and to do it for his next son, and to do that every Friday, to say you are enough, you are loved, you belong. And then for the rest of Shabbat, to just have pleasure, to have good food, to have connection, to have talks and chats, to play snakes and ladders and so on, to read a good book. That's their culture. Secure attachment is in there. Affection is in there. Affirmation is in there. Connection and affection and laughter is in there. And is it any surprise that the one group with the highest number of geniuses are the Jews? Is it any surprise? Because what they are in effect doing is they are triggering the neurosystem of the child, the sympathetic autonomic nervous system. They are stimulating the parasympathetic nervous system. You are enough, you are loved, you are secure, you are safe, you don't need to worry. And so these children turn up at school and they turn up at university, not in doubt, not insecure, not out of relationship, fully in relationship, having all of their emotional and other kinds of needs met, and their brains are fully operating and engaging on the task in front of it. Okay? So maybe the last thing to say is all this is necessary because in terms of neuroscience, if I'm unsafe, you're triggering my parasympathetic nervous system, the part of me that organizes fight, flight, overwhelm, and freeze. And of course, fawn, F-A-W-N, fawn, triggers fawn. Okay? That's what the sympathetic nervous system triggers. It's a way that the body is trying to make itself safe. If it's going to try and get safety through fighting or through dissociative behavior, flight, or it's just overwhelmed, it doesn't take any action, it's freezing, it doesn't know what to do, or it's going to fawn, which is to cooperate, because the safest thing to do under the circumstances is to just obey, to just cooperate so that the danger can pass. Okay, so if you're living your life out of your elevated, triggered, sympathetic nervous system, then your brain is busy prioritizing your safety. And when it's doing that, it is limiting the functioning of the part of the brain that's responsible for executive decision-making, planning, strategizing, problem solving. That part of our brain is being suspended while the brain is trying to focus on our safety. That's when you live your life out of your sympathetic nervous system. But when you're living it out of the parasympathetic nervous system, then all the signals in the brain is you are safe, you are loved, you are accepted. And so while the brain is in that space, the entire part of the brain that deals with executive function, thinking, problem solving, connecting, and so on, it is fully functional. fully functional. And so people who are living their lives out of their parasympathetic nervous system, and their children live their lives out of the parasympathetic nervous system, have the full faculties of their brain to turn up, to focus, and to achieve great things. I'm going to stop there for now. There's a lot more we can say. I think our time is up. Torsten, over to you.
Monty, thank you. Thank you. We actually, I think, wanted to just keep you talking.
We can do another one. We can do maybe another thing in future, Torsten. We can continue.
Thank you, Monty. Questions. You know how this works, right? So use your little blue hand feature or just unmute yourself even.
Yes, good morning. Thank you very much. That was incredibly inspiring. I just want to be very clear, not that I need to be convinced, but specifically all of what you mentioned, what specifically relates to dads or parents in general, and what if there is no dad? How do you compensate?
Oh, okay. So the father, it's security, it is identity. So there are four really very useful things that the father speaks into the life of the child. And the child is, in South Africa, if you look at Stats SA, it says that the Indian community feel most safe. And when you look into why the Indian community feels more safe is they are the highest percentage of men or fathers present in the lives of the family. They remain in the family, they don't leave. And so not only are they the most present in terms of our ethnic mix in South Africa, but there's an extended group of men or males in the family that make the family feel really safe. So just the presence of the male in the household deflects from especially the female family members unnecessary attention that's exploitative. If you look at our data and data that's generated through the University of KwaZulu-Natal, in the households where there are men or a male present, there's less harassment for women in those households. So predators go after greater vulnerability, and the greater vulnerability is associated with the absence of men. Particularly if the man is sober, is engaged, is interested in what happens to his daughter. That's very quickly perceived in a community. There's a backing off from that girl when dad is present and dad is engaged. You're quite right that a single mom can do this job. But all the data and all the research shows us a single mom is probably okay. This is God's genius. But a dad together with a mom, loving her and caring for the children, there's absolutely no comparison. Mom and dad in a loving relationship with each other, creating this enabling environment for their children, simply doesn't compare at any level to mom trying to do that by herself.
A little bit earlier on, you started basically telling us about the role of the father, and you said there are four things.
Yes.
First two, security, identity. Can you get to the other two off the top of your head, or is that not a fair question?
No. I have them right here. The father confers identity. He provides security. He establishes moral authority. And remember, he does that through the moral authority that he's given God over his life. I only have authority to the extent my children can see that I'm submitting to the authority of God in my life. Otherwise, I disqualify myself. You know, if I'm screaming and shouting and performing to my children, I am ignoring the authority of God over my life that urges temperance, and urges do not frustrate your children. And if I accept that authority over my life, and I submit to that authority, and I'm continually trying to get to where I am really plugged into my relationship with God, it gives me authority in the eyes of my children to be able to speak the language of God to them. So I don't give moral authority to children as though it comes from me. I extend God's moral authority through me into my children. So moral authority, identity, security, and confirms or affirms potential. The fourth one. The father has a lot to say about what you're good at. Now, mom can do that, but the research is showing that when dad says you're good at something, the child somehow accepts that as a greater truth than mom. They don't think mom is lying. They just think mom is biased, and mom's love for me is making her say all kinds of things to me. But dad is also saying what my potential is and what I'm good at. I am more convinced. And so dad must turn up and help children understand what they're good at. I see the gift God's placed in you. I see it outworking in your life. I see how good you are at this thing or that thing. And children receive that very well from dad.
So I love how you phrased your talk. I mean, how you structured it. You know, having to securely attach love, affirmation, and pleasure, and so on, and almost like that. I love that idea because even if you're in different cultural spaces with different personalities, you can still access this connective tissue and sort of pivot into whatever space you're in, into whatever personality you're in, whatever culture you're in. So I love that it overrides all those things. And also I love the fact that you've also handled a whole entire topic, by the way, I think, of GBV, because this is kind of what explains why we are where we are in South Africa as far as GBV is concerned. I was wondering if there are any parental approaches that you specifically would encourage and endorse, because there, you know, right now in the world, there's so many parental approaches. You know, you find people that are so indulgent of their kids, for example, and other cultures will think, well, that's a lack of discipline, you know. So I wonder if there are any parental approaches that you would particularly endorse, and yeah, if I can attract a comment from you on any of the things I've said.
Okay, so I would say we've started creating our own. In fact, we've done a few parenting workshops using this foundation and this framework. And as you say, because it cuts across humanity, and that is God's genius, that He's made us in a certain way. So because we function best within that framework. Now, just remember that a child still needs to get up from the dining room table and fetch its own water. It can't send mom. If the child is able to do that for themselves, they need to be nurtured so that they do it for themselves. This is really just a framework for how you become the container and the enabling environment for your child to grow and mature and become independent. Now, I'm using the Jewish framework for seasons and timelines. So for a girl by the age of 12, God's wisdom to the Jews said, in terms of that culture, she is not a little child anymore. She's capable of many things. You can give her more responsibility. And God does that for the boy at 13. You can welcome him into the circle of other men. He can sit among older men and be inadvertently schooled, coached, and relationally drawn in by older men, because he's making more sense of how society around him is functioning, what's problematic for society, which problems need to be solved, and how must we collaborate as a community to solve these problems. So the idea that children are on a journey from day one to their independent state where they're leading their own families. From day one, they're on their journey. And so my role as a father is to create the nurturing and enabling environment for him to grow in confidence, grow in relationship, understand that he's accepted, he's okay as he is, making sense of his environment. You know, in the beginning, when he's so-called clumsy and he's doing dishes, the bowl is going to be soapy, slippery, fall out of your hands and break. And in some communities, he'll get a slap and be told he's got butterfingers and money doesn't grow on trees. But in some environments, someone is going to soothe him and say, okay, so what have you learned today? Put a cloth under it, hold your hand under it, rinse it off first so that it's not so slippery. Come, let's pick this up. Don't you worry. It's okay. It's only a bowl. Some are going to do it that way. You understand? And so the idea with this is not that you're indulgent and babying children, but that you create the right environment in which a child can flourish. The child can be nurtured, the child can grow, and the child can be developed. The other way is where the child is diminished, reduced, and punished for learning how to become competent. This environment creates a loving environment, an environment for connectedness while the child is growing. And we recognize that the child has to become an independent individual living their own life. And we understand that my parenting is merely a scaffolding. I'm scaffolding and building and enabling. And the child doesn't lose relationship because they're getting it wrong, but they are being supported. The relationship is being restored. Sometimes there are really anxious moments in this model. But the child is learning, I won't be abandoned, I won't be orphaned, I won't be disqualified to the extent that my relationships cannot be recovered. But the child is learning to stand on its own feet. At some point, scaffolding comes off and the structure needs to stand on its own. And I hope that helps.
How do we provide this foundation that you're talking about to children who are not in supportive families?
So we know what these four things are, right? And we know that the children get these four things through eye contact, touch, stimulation. Anyone can do those things. What's needed is the commitment to the child to get these things done. So sometimes even a teacher at school is that person, making you feel like you're enough, making you feel like you're loved, making you feel like you belong, celebrating your birthday. You've never had a birthday cake. And the teacher gets all the kids to sing happy birthday to you, to Torsten, and here's a cake, and we're cutting the cake, and Torsten has this enormous grin on his face. Anyone can do these four things for any other human being. The reason why it's in the lap of mom and dad is they are the first humans responsible for doing these things for this child. But let's say they fail. Other human beings can do these four things for the child. So what God is saying in Scripture, and I think it's the book of Mark, he says in the kingdom you'll have many fathers, many mothers, many brothers and sisters. The kingdom is a village of people. Research that was done concluded that a child is best raised in a village of people, using the same kind of language that God used in the book of Mark. Now, what the Dutch have gone and done, fatherhood. What the Dutch have gone and done is they've put preschool or crashes into this was an experiment. I wish they would roll it out right through Holland. And in fact, it would be rolled out right through the world. They've put preschools in old age homes. And they've allowed university students to have free accommodation or very reduced accommodation in old age homes, provided you connect with the elderly, you chat with them, you go for a walk with those who would like to go for a walk, or you take Mr. So-and-so for a coffee down at a coffee shop, or you go and do shopping with Mr. So-and-so. If you do these things, you can stay here for free. You can put a crash. And now there's the running around of little children, very therapeutic for the elderly. Why? Because these different age groups are very good at connecting with each other and making each other feel as though we're enough, as though we're loved, as though we matter. And hopefully in that mix, there will also be laughter and play and fun.
My question, well, or maybe a comment to reflect on, I was thinking about discipleship in the local church and how often the discipleship can come out as punishment. Like if you don't do these 5 things, pray more, read more, read the Bible more, attend church, tithe more, blah, 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 all the mores, then of course, God's going to get you or whatever. But what I hear you saying is that the church is to be like this kind of a father, to nurture Christians. So in your illustration of washing the dishes, don't we all miss things sometimes and things slip out of our hands and they break? And instead we say, it's because, out comes the finger. So I found that kind of a wonderful picture of training even the wonderful gift we have to disciple one another and mentor one another. So thank you.
You're very welcome. And it's correct. And in fact, one of the solutions for this is that you are locked into some sort of a mentorship journey, some sort of a discipleship journey, where the relationship, I am seeing things in you that I desire for me, and I am making the changes to me to reflect that. And you know what? If you go into mirror neurons, if you study, just go and look into mirror neurons. Human beings have God's placed mirror neurons in us because we were meant to mirror what we see in others. We quite literally are able to copy what other humans are doing by looking at them doing it. Our brains are designed so that we're learning by watching. And having good relationships with people make them feel safe enough to draw close to me. And as they draw close to me and there's a line of affection between us, I'm eager to learn from you. I can see things that are admirable in you, and I aspire to walk in that way as well. And that's why good relationships are important, because if I'm distressed when I come near you, I'm coming into judgment. I'm coming into a relationship with a person that's condemning me or potentially going to tell me I'm not enough and this version of me is not acceptable, then I'm more guarded. I'm not learning so well in that environment. I'm not admiring things that I want to emulate in that environment. And so the first thing with discipleship is that the relationship is affectionate, it's warm, it is a loving connection, because in that way, you're triggering my parasympathetic nervous system. There's joy in me, there's gratefulness in me, and I learn better by what I'm seeing. There's admiration rising up in me, and I can mirror what I'm seeing. My brain is able to make a copy of it and reverse engineer it so that I can also turn up that way. And discipleship needs to be that. traumatology in essence is just the opposite of these things. You have the 4 pillars that gives you emotional strength, that you belong, that you're loved, and all of that. Trauma is the absence of these things.
Yeah.
And so trauma is not only the absence of it, but the opposite of it.
Yeah.
Because sometimes the very opposite is what the child is experiencing. Instead of eye contact and touch, he's receiving inappropriate sexual touch or receiving smacks and so on, beatings. So it is the opposite of these 4 things. And so the research in traumatology tells you what happens to the person when they don't have these 4 things.
Okay. What I'm trying to get at, Monty, is that just to get into your world of traumatology and South and explore a bit of South African in terms of apartheid and so on, and what's brought us here, and how clearly that there's a strong link to what you've been talking about in terms of creating fatherlessness and the societies and townships and all that we know. You know, do you find that there's been something
yes,
that's really impacted the psyche of South Africans, which has deprived us of these I suppose it's obvious, but yeah.
Well, there are many reasons why people become traumatized. Let's take the white population, and just let me say this: God created human beings as one species. They come in all shapes and all colors and all sizes. They go from coal black to luminant white. That's the spectrum of humans. They are just one species. They were not supposed to be subdivided and made to seem as though they're different races. There's absolutely no evidence for that, either in scripture or in science. It's just one species. Okay. But because the different groups are located in very specific places, right? That's okay, Yolanda. Because these people were in different spaces and they were closely connected relationally, they saw each other as separate from another group. And to you as well. So that's a problem. That's a fault. They are not separated, and a faces should not be turned against each other just because they have had separate cultural journeys with each other. They're still only one species, designed by one God, and he designed that so that there's diversity. It's absolutely no different to the way God created different colors of flowers or colors of fish. They're just one thing that comes in different colors. Let's take the experience of Europeans or so-called white people. They just, again, people who are at a different color spectrum in the human existence. Let's take them as a quick example of trauma. What do you think happened at the end of the Great War, the Second World War, to the men who survived that Great War, who saw their comrades being blown to pieces, shot and killed right next to them, heads chopped off, and the head carried around like a trophy? Just unspeakable things that these men experienced and saw. And they had the misfortune to survive that. And then they came home, and the family had to receive them back. And there was no such a thing as post-traumatic stress disorder. It wasn't defined. There was no intervention for it. What do you think they were like as people? And so whether it is people were subjugated, they were annihilated because they were unfortunate to live on a mineral-rich area, and they had to be moved out of the way violently so that people could get to those minerals, whether that is how they received their trauma, or because war was declared and we went through this war where 20 million people were slaughtered and I survived that. Both these people have been severely traumatized. And that's going to have an impact on how they see the world, how they engage with the world, and what journey is necessary for them to heal. Okay, so in the case of any violence to another person, it's a terrible violation of the integrity of the person's neurological system, and they will glitch after that. So when you look at the violence of apartheid and these other kinds of things, you will know that people will glitch as a result of that. If you experience violence through a war and you're a white person, you'll glitch because of that. Whatever the reasons may be, people are going to glitch, whether it's slavery, whatever the case may be. If you've survived it, you probably need your faith in humanity restored in a loving way, in an affectionate way. You need to have it restored. And so the one other thing to say to you is, Black South Africans are not the only people who suffered. The Jews have suffered over and over again. They suffered in the Second World War. They suffered in the Middle East in different places. They suffered. The Chinese suffered all through Southeast Asia. People blocked them, wouldn't let them get into university, stabbed them to death in the street because they were too successful. There are just endless numbers of people over time who had horrible experiences. I think the question that we must probably spend some time on is, how do you heal from that and move on? How do you not build a garden for yourself in your pain? How do you not pitch a tent and set out a garden and settle in a deck chair in your pain? How do you recognize that and say, my neuroplasticity and the will of God is that I'm the head and not the tail. I'm not meant to reside here. I'm meant to move on from here. How do we move? How do we give ourselves permission to heal and move away from that? I've got things to say about that, but we don't have the time for it now, Mbuluma. But we as Black people do ourselves a great deal of harm for staying there. We must leave that place. It's full of booby traps. It's full of landmines. And in fact, scripture in the book of Romans chapter 13 says this: owe no man anything except love. And then Paul says in the book of Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 13, he says, he gives a quality of love. Remember, he said in Romans, don't owe anyone anything except loving them. In Corinthians, he says, love hopes, love believes, and love keeps no record of wrong. Paul says, love keeps no record of wrong. Rid yourself of the wrong that the other person did. Do not keep a record of it. Hope all things, believe all things, and don't keep a record of wrong. That's part of the journey of moving away from the pain and from the wrong.
Yeah, a huge thank you, Monty. Thank you for inspiring hope. Thank you for inspiring us to be better fathers, to be better parents, to be better people. Thank you so much for...
it was so much fun. It was a lot of fun, and I feel honored and really feel grateful for the invitation. Thank you.